If you want to get Keystone Master in Season 3 of Dragonflight, you need to play these specs to get it quick and easy and 100% reliable. Who's that Pokemon, eh? Or rather, who's that Pokemon? I'll see myself out. KSM can be easier to get and maybe even more fun than just playing boring flavor of the month specs, although that isn't excluded. I'll give you the best spec for each role and tell you why these are good to push even higher than KSM. Why should you care or want KSM? KSM, or Keystone Master, is an achievement you receive for reaching 2000 Mythic Plus rating. Although the rating is good in and of itself, to showcase you can do Mythic Plus at a competent level, it also rewards you with a unique mount, which this season is the Verdant Armadon. But most importantly, it is part of the Dragonflight Season 3 Master achievement that will give you a free tier piece, or rather the Emerald Mark of Mastery, that can be exchanged for any tier set piece of your choice at this vendor here in the Emerald Dream Zone. Aside from actual physical rewards, it can be for most people the stepping stone into pushing Mythic Plus keys by giving them the first checkpoint in this part of endgame content. Whatever the reason you have for wanting KSM, the rewards are definitely something most people strive for, and they will be relevant for mains as well as for alts. Now, a bit of a caveat for the Mythic Plus rating. When it comes to pushing these M Plus keys, we all know that certain dungeons are easier, certain affixes are easier, and by extension the best or quickest or easiest dungeons to push for maximum rating will be different and depend on the week. If you want to see a video going over those, we'll do it if this one reaches something like 10k likes. Until then, let's actually talk about the specs and why they are better. First, let's check out the ideal melee DPS to get KSM with, which is 1000% Outlaw. Maybe a surprise to some of you, maybe not. Outlaw is obviously one of the best melee DPS specs in the game. I know what you are thinking, but Flame, Havoc deals more damage and brings a party buff. True, and there might even be a point about assassination as well, since statistically it's looking like it's doing a bit better than Outlaw, at least at the recording of this video. Red Paladin is also an honorable mention for being really easy to play, one of the tankiest DPSers in the game, and actually needing no ramp or specific pulls to do giga DPS in 18s or lower. But Outlaw is the final choice, and here's why. It's a pretty straightforward spec. Keep your rolled bones and blade flurry up, don't waste procs or resources, and just by that you will out DPS most other people in the group. Sure, it's currently the spec with the most APM in the game, so it might not be for everyone, but do you want that easy KSM or not? And I'm not saying Outlaw is easy, definitely not easier than Red, but easier than Assassination or Enhancement, so maybe it's about average. This doesn't matter, however. What matters is that it's consistent across the board. You'll do good damage in both dungeons and raids, and Outlaw has been a solid key pusher for years now. On top of that, it's one of the best performing specs at the moment, so getting invited into groups will be a cinch. Worst case scenario, if the ban hammer cracks hard in a week or two, you can go to Assassination or Sub. Although by that time you may likely have KSM already, so do you even care? On top of damage, you are a very tanky DPS, and the rework made it better to pick some utility and defensives. Feint with cheat death is enough to save your butt enough times for you to time a key. It did for me, and I'm a dumbass. Longest single target stun in the game, Kidney Shot, AoE Blind, Vanish, and a few other damage reduction abilities will make sure you don't kick the bucket and delay the key timer more than necessary. And if you are at any point finding it overwhelming or intimidating, remember that the rotation in both single target and AoE is identical in Mythic Plus. You even use Blade Flurry in single target nowadays, so really your learning process should be considerably shorter than on any other rogue spec or most other melee DPSers in the game. Let's move on to range, and coincidence or not, my recommendation is going to be Beast Mastery Hunter. I'm saying coincidence because it's actually giga good, but would have recommended it even if its damage would be lower or if it gets nerfed multiple times. First of all, BM Hunter is one of the most popular specs in the game. Right now, it's statistically the most played spec because it's probably meta, but last patch and whenever it was not meta, it was at least top 5. Top 5! Out of 24, 26 something DPS specs in the game as a non-meta spec. Because of this, it will never be nerfed too hard. Blizz likes to keep their bottom line happy, and nerfing BM too hard would upset most main players right now, so it's not gonna happen. So in that area, you don't need to worry as much as you should if you were a Havoc Demon Hunter or a Augmentation Evoker. That aside, we can agree its damage is super incredible right now. But like I said, I would have recommended it even if it wasn't. The reason this is your best pick as a a range DPS is because it's the only spec that can do its rotation while moving. Why is that important? Well, the obvious answer would be because it makes it incredibly easier to do your rotation without losing damage while also dodging mechanics and handling crowd control. Second, and this is implied by the first point, the barrier of entry for players to the spec will be significantly lower. It will make it quicker for you to hop on and start doing keys, and will keep you performing above average with little to no punishment if you mess up your rotation. That being said, since this has to be also mentioned, the spec does not play itself. Optimizing your damage and cooldowns matter, and when you do, you will see a big difference in your overall DPS. As opposed to Outlaw, however, you are not as tanky. Granted, your lack of tankiness will usually show in key levels above 20, where you will die when most other DPSers will drop to 10% HP. That's usually if you go for a way higher M+ push than KSM, and even then, Hunter has plethora of tricks to deal with. As an example, in Season 1, I personally felt this, and it didn't make me happy that I was the first to die in my team. However, you can play a Tenacity Pet and have access to more HP and an extra defensive cooldown at the sacrifice of a Bloodlust. You can do this in the whole dungeon with the exception of about 3 or 4 fights where you would get out your Bloodlust pet. And you only do this in keys higher than what's required for KSM, and if there's nobody else that can provide Bloodlust in the sea of evokers, mages left and right, shamans everywhere else, and the existence of feral hide drums. So if this ever is a problem, then it should be your last problem after you have already completed the goal for which you picked the spec in the first place. And now that we covered the main concern everyone has with Hunter, BM is one of the best specs in the game, period. We covered already all of it in our BM video, which you can check down below, so I will quickly recap it for you right now. BM has likely the most CC and utility in the entire game. You have Bloodlust, you have unlimited mobility, and potential to help your group deal with all manner of mechanics and affixes. You will rarely die in keys lower than 20 unless you are severely undergeared, which would be true for all specs, not just BM. If there is one spec in this video I am 100% comfortable recommending for KSM regardless of the role you want to play, BM is definitely the first. But not before our Patreon page. It supports videos like this and helps us give back to you for being a part of the team. Early access videos, bloopers, customizable desktop wallpapers with your characters, and our humble gratitude if you decide to check it out down below. In keeping it simple and accessible, the healer of choice I will recommend you take is Restoration Shaman. This is likely the hottest take of this video, and everybody who disagrees is a fool. This is how you start drama in a YouTube video, by the way, and farm viewer outrage for content. But jokes aside, Resto Shaman would be the first healer I would recommend to anyone wanting KSM. Similarly to BM Hunter, it's likely the easiest healer to play, which is advantageous because the lower barrier of entry makes it so you need less time to perfect and perform with the spec to achieve your goals. Also, similarly to BM, don't make the mistake of thinking the spec pilots itself. Although you may not feel lacking in key levels necessary for KSM, Resto Shaman becomes more difficult to play the higher the key you do. And since that's not the topic for today, let's focus on what you can do to achieve KSM. First of all, Bloodlust is a much more sought after commodity than you may realize, or than people might let you believe. Since the loudest nerds are the ones that play in their own augmentation bubble, you may not realize that most parties don't have a Bloodlust. As an example, our party has Marcelian on Unholy Decay, Mokti on Red Paladin, myself on Balanced Druid or Bear, and another friend of ours on Resto Druid. Sometimes we are lucky enough to get Lego on augmentation, but that's only in a few keys per week. Other times we play with our priest and warrior friends, neither of whom have a Bloodlust. I have a stack of dozens of drums, and I spend a dozen of them more times than a Lust spec gets to play with us. So having this particular spell makes you more worth than you realize. Since the spec is easy to heal with, no intricate ramp up or combo cooldown prep like Resto Druid or Preservation Evoker, you are more likely to have room for error or simply deal with dispels, CCs, or just DPS. And DPS is also really easy. Put Flame Shock on the target and fire Lava Burst. If after you have exhausted your Lava Burst you still don't have any healing to do, spam cast Lightning Bolts or Chain Lightning. Not to mention that that the Acid Rain talent makes your Healing Rain deal damage, and Healing Rain is something you always use to heal people, so dealing damage won't even be something you go out of your way to do, but something that just happens because you're healing. Earth Elemental is also an incredible cooldown that saves more parties than most people like to admit, especially parties of pugs that are uncoordinated, have a bad tank, a bad pool, or simply an overly ambitious fight above your eye level that can only be made possible by adding an extra tank for a few seconds while you heal everyone back up. Lastly, Spirit Link is the best party saver for fuck-ups that exist in the game outside giving everybody immunity, which actually doesn't exist, so yay for you! Putting down a Spirit Link totem saves any one person from messing up bursting, not kicking a deadly spell, not using a defensive, or simply not waiting for you to heal them back up. Very few healers have mechanics that save the group from certain deaths, and none of them have that coupled with Bloodlust, multiple dispels from totems, and a tier set that changes and forces nothing on your part when it comes to how you play and what talents you use. Resto Shaman might not be the most interesting healer, but it definitely brings every tool to get the job done, and likely the easiest healer to get KSM with quick. Closing off with the tank, no, I will not recommend Vengeance Demon Hunter, but instead Protection Warrior. This is by far the best choice in tanks when either starting out or simply aiming at a quick goal like KSM. We keep it simple this time around, and yes, if you haven't played Prot Warrior in Dragonflight, the spec is ridiculously easy this time around and does ridiculous damage for being so ridiculously tanky. Understanding Prot Warrior is like explaining tanking to a 4-year-old. Lift up the big thing when dangerous thing comes your way. Block it, then hit it back with your big thing. Congratulations, you took less damage and dealt damage back to the thing. There's nothing confusing about shield. Block, shield. Wall, and shield. Slam. The talent build is pretty consistent across the board, so you don't need to invest in learning multiple playstyles. You have a large kit and crowd control and damage dealing to handle all dungeons properly. And if you really want to make your DPS mad, you can spell reflect a large amount of dangerous casts that deal stupid damage back at the attackers. Sometimes I'm surprised at how much damage the devs intended me to take from that spell, so I just send it back at the mob that cast it. Being easy to play, super tanky, and deals high damage is pretty much most of the stuff you need to get KSM. Having high mobility in charges and leaps doesn't hurt either. On the off chance that you messed up or somebody else didn't interrupt something, simply leaping out of the fight to kite the pack should win you enough seconds to have your personal heal back or at least another defensive. Sometimes the best way to achieve the goal is to take the easy and fast way there, which is with these specs today. And as an example, check our BM Hunter video on why the spec is so good. I bet there's at least 2 things you didn't know about the spec, so go and see if it's as easy as you thought.